Historic Brawl is coming back to Magic Arena for F&M at home on May 15th, and not only is Historic Brawl awesome, but we have a full new expansion added to the mix this time around. What's up everyone, my name's Sunnyvale, and welcome to the Brawl Project. Today we're going to be looking at 5 new strategies that incorporate the new cards from Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths for this week's F&M at home, Historic Brawl. My goal with these decks is to feature a wide range of strategies that will appeal to as many different players as possible, and if you'd like to go on ahead and just jump to one strategy in particular, go ahead. The timestamps are going to be linked in the description and the comments, as well as timestamps. I also have deck lists for all of these exportable to Magic Arena through the lovely folks over at Scryfall, so check that out. Last month, I made a video with 7 deck techs. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend it. You can check it out up there. While those decks still work perfectly well for Historic Brawl, they don't feature the new cards the same way that these do. I'll be making another short video that goes over what additions you might want to consider from the new set for those decks, and when it's ready, it'll be available up here and also down in the description. And, of course, as this is a YouTube video, I am contractually obligated to ask that you like, comment, follow, subscribe, share, ghost, raid, upvote, name drop, whatever you want to do at the end of this video. And thank you, I really appreciate it. Alright, with all that preamble out of the way, let's get into the decks. Our first deck of the day is a hyper-aggressive Judith the Scourge Diva deck with Obosh the Preypiercer as a companion. Judith is a great aggressive commander. She's a 3-mana black-red 2/2 that has other creatures you control get +1/+0, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith deals 1 damage to any target. So we're going to want plenty of small creatures to pick up her buff, as well as be fodder for her ping, her second ability. Obosh is a 5-mana 3/5 and says that if a source you control with an odd converted mana cost would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So Obosh doubles the damage of everything in this deck, including Judith, and effectively doubling both Judith's static buff and her ping ability. But it does come at the hefty restriction that non-lands have to have an odd converted mana cost, which is the main challenge to building this deck. Now, companions are obviously busted, but sometimes the deck building restrictions can make it difficult to take advantage of them in Brawl because of the Highlander constraint. Fortunately, in Historic, we have access to a larger card pool, which means that when we're limited by constraints like this, that means we can be happier about the last few cards that make the cut. This commander pair is available in Standard, but what isn't available is the wealth of 1-drops that we get access to in order to fill out the curve. When playing a deck with all odd cost cards, what we want to be doing is we want to play a 1-drop on turn 1, 2 more 1-drops on turn 2, then 3 drops on turn 3 and 4. While there are plenty of 1-drops in Standard, they usually attack for 1, and the abilities tacked onto them aren't very useful. Increasing the card pool to Historic, we get Diregraph Ghoul, Grasping Scoundrel, and Vicious Conquistador. Not the most groundbreaking cards ever, but exactly what this strategy needs to run smoothly. While most of the deck are aggressive elements that you'd expect from a deck like this, Rotting Regisaur, for example, can hit for a whopping 14 when you have Obosh out. We have a couple ways of keeping the cards flowing. Treacherous Blessing and Ox of Gonis are neat little draw 3s. There's the Ox. And Midnight Reaper is good at replenishing our losses. Some cards that work particularly well with our Commander Companion pair are Weaponize the Monsters, there it is, which deals a ton of damage with either on board. Krenko and Legion Warboss both benefit from Judith's Punt by making additional bodies, and Goblin Motivator can give your Obosh haste and attack for 6 the turn that we play it. For removal, we have Bedevil and Murderous Rider, as well as Shock, Banefire, and Stomp from the Bone Crusher Giant, which can also go face. We're also playing Duress and Drillbit to hit our opponent's hand, as we're extremely concerned about sweepers or other efficient ways of halting aggression. So if we can snag one of those out of our opponent's hands, we're pretty happy to do so. One thing we're really excited to do with this deck is cheat the deck building restriction. That is to say that including cards that can be cast for an even converted mana cost, even if their top right corner is odd. A couple nice examples are Bone Crusher Giant, whose shock costs 2, the stomp, Goblin Rune Blaster, which we will usually be playing for 4, and Banefire, which we can cast for whatever mana cost we want. Now, the thing with Banefire is that you do have to actually pay an odd amount of mana if you want to get the double damage off of Obosh. The converted mana cost of this card while it's on the stack is equal to whatever you paid for X plus 1. The lands in this deck are very straightforward. We only have 24 lands in the entire list and substantial color requirements, so we don't really have a ton of room for utility lands. We'll play one of each castle because they usually come in untapped but have nice effects. And while this is an aggro deck, I think we can get away with just a couple tapped lands because the odd restriction gives us a few extra opportunities to play tapped lands. Playing a 1-drop and a tapped land on turn 2, for instance, or a 3-drop and a tap land on turn 4. This allows us to include longtime favorites Barren Moor and Forgotten Cave, and they have cycling just in case we're flooded, but I think most of the time they are just coming into play tapped. Enjoy this deck. If you like aggressive strategies, I think that this is the deck for you, especially if you want to try out the new companion mechanic in Historic Brawl. Next up, we have another deck that has heavy deck building constraints, though this time around we are aiming to do something completely different. Ever since I first read Illuna Apex of Wishes, this is exactly what I've been yearning to do with the card, and Historic Brawl is the only place where this strategy is legal. Suffice to say, I am thrilled for the opportunity to play this deck. Illuna Apex of Wishes is a 5-mana green, blue, and red 6/6 flying trample, but the key to this card is it has Mutate for 3 hybrid green, red, blue, basically 6 mana. Whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card. Put that card onto the battlefield or in your hand. This is Illuna Omniscience, a deck whose only permanent is Omniscience. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to play Illuna mutated onto a token in order to cheat out an early Omniscience and take over the game from there. Now, Omniscience, of course, is a 10-mana enchantment that says you may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana costs. No matter where the Omniscience is in your deck, you will definitely be able to find it with this deck. This is a deck where you don't actually want to draw the Omniscience, as a mutated Illuna will, at that point, exile your entire library because you have no non-land permanents, and you'll die. So if you draw the Omniscience, naturally you're going to have to play a more conventional game, which this deck can do, although it's not, built to maximize that style of play. We do have a flood of tiers that can potentially cheat it out, but without a way to find Omniscience, it's not the most reliable. If all goes according to plan, you can cast a Lazotep Plating on your opponent's end step, untap, slam Illuna on the army, and put Omniscience into play. And then you can cast a big draw spell and hold up counter magic. Or, alternatively, you can potentially just cast Nexus of Fate, take another turn, and start digging toward that Nexus of Fate to try to chain together extra turns. This deck has to make a bunch of sacrifices in order to make the combo work, as well as live with cases where Omniscience might be like the bottom card of your library and you just run out of runway to actually close the game out, but hopefully the combo-oriented folk out there will love it. The combo we're trying to assemble each game is simply a token generator and our commander, so let's just run down our available token generators. So first I'll go over the sorcery speed token generators, aka the bad ones. We've got Satyr's Cunning. We've got Callous Dismissal. This is one of the mass cards. We're going to have a bunch of these. We have Honor the God Pharaoh. We have Mythos of Illuna. And we have Field of Ruin, which makes zombie tokens. There we go. No, sorry, Field of the Dead. I get those two mixed up sometimes. While all these cards create tokens, we either have to assemble a large amount of mana in order to get the combo off in one turn, or make our token pass the turn and pray that our opponent doesn't disrupt our setup. Fortunately, we also have a few ways of making tokens at instant speed. We've got Lazotep Plating, we've got Crush Descent, and we have Commence the Endgame. There it is. These are the cards we're trying to get our opponent with. Our opponent taps out for Ugin on 6 into all of our open mana. Do we want to counter it with a negate? No, of course not. After they activate the Ugin, we'll just play Lazotep Plating to make a 1/1, and then we're going to slam Illuna on it, and get the Omniscience into play, and then just attack down their Ugin, and do whatever else we want to do with Omniscience. The rest of the deck just functions to support the aforementioned main cast. We've got a tiny bit of removal. We've got a sweeper in Storm's Wrath. We have a bit of a ramp package here. And we have counter magic both to protect our combo in like Spell Pierce and Negate, as well as just serve as protection or ways of taking over the game for when we have Omniscience out. We also have a bunch of hefty draw spells in Precognitive Perception, Draw from Dreams, Overflowing Insight, to explode once we don't care about mana anymore and have Omniscience in play. Well, that's the deck. I'm not exactly sure how consistent this deck is, but I'm super excited to give it a shot and see what it can do, because it seems like a lot of fun. Alright, if you like attacking for huge chunks of damage at a time, this is the deck for you. Alright, if you like attacking for huge chunks of damage at a time, this is the deck for you. Zilortha's title is no joke. This truly is Strength Incarnate. Zilortha is a 7/3 trample for 5 mana. It's a dinosaur, and it says that lethal damage dealt to your creatures you control is determined by their power rather than their toughness, which means this is usually essentially a 7/7 for 5 mana. This is also the Buy a Box promo. If you're curious why you haven't seen this card yet, it's not available in booster packs, at least not to my knowledge. And, well, I mean, on Magic Arena, you can just get it by spending a mythic wildcard. While previous dinosaur legends have either been really expensive, in the case of, say, Zakama Primal Calamity, which costs 9, or only allow for 1 color in commander formats, such as Itali Primal Storm, Zilortha Strength Incarnate gives us the best of both worlds. I have extremely fond memories of showing up to commander games with Karthus Tyrant of Jund, a commander that doesn't draw cards, only to deliver my opponents their swift end 7 points of hasty damage at a time, and that's exactly what we're going to try to be doing here. There are 2 main aspects to this deck: huge dinosaurs and ways of making said huge dinosaurs interact with our opponent's life total. One of the things we're most interested in for this strategy are ways of giving our creatures haste. We have 6 ways. They are Samut Tyrant Smasher, Otepec Huntmaster, Footfall Crater, Domri Chaos Bringer, there we are, Rhythm of the Wild, and Regisaur Alpha, all of which will be able to give Zilortha haste and attack for 7 the way that we play it. It's not too hard to imagine a scenario where we curve into our commander with one of these effects and get that coveted huge hit in. Of course, our commander is not our only huge creature. We're playing a full showcase of heavyweights in this one, including Itali Primal Storm, which works really well with haste, Carnage Tyrant for all of those pesky blue mages, Ravager Worm, hashtag not a dino, Yadaro Wandering One, which is a nice new addition, and even Galta Primal Hunger. And while we're on the theme of having our creature's power interact with our opponent's face, we've also got a Thud and Ram Through, which paired with our commander threaten to do a lot of damage. It's also worth mentioning that this is the perfect deck for Sarkhan's Unsealing. I've always wanted to spew fire all over my opponents, and we have a ton of ways of getting the ultimate trigger in this deck, such as our commander, but also all of these huge dinos. Here's a random scene from Game of Thrones to get you in the mood for this action. Unsurprisingly, this deck also features mana creatures that you would come to expect from a Gruul mid-range deck. I looked up the ruling and it appears that 0 power creatures don't just die when you play Zilortha, so that frees us up to use creatures like Leafkin Druid and Incubation Druid. I'm mostly looking forward to using Goreclaw, Terror of Calcima, because I haven't found too many great spots for this in the past, but it looks perfect for this one with all the creatures that benefit from the cost reduction. There isn't really anything groundbreaking about this deck, except perhaps the size of its creatures. Just a couple of big boys and trying to have a good time. Now go out there and mash that orange button on Magic Arena and have some fun with this. And if you don't like attacking, this is probably the deck for you. Last time around, I built a Teferi Hero of Dominaria deck that honestly made me feel pretty dead inside. If countering everything in sight and playing control, where control means taking control of all the fun in the game, is your thing, why not add a little bit of spice to your life and try Narset of the Ancient Way? Narset is a 4-mana Jeskai commander. She's a planeswalker with 4 starting loyalty. She has a +1 that says you gain 2 life, add blue, red, or white, spend this mana only to cast a non-creature spell. -2, draw a card, then you may discard a card. When you discard a non-land card this way, Narset deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to target creature or planeswalker. So that's a way of protecting herself. And the -6 is you get an emblem saying whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this emblem deals 2 damage to any target. So while we've had Planeswalker control decks before, and we've had Jeskai control decks before, Narset is a pretty big upgrade to the commander options we've had for this type of strategy. Narset allows for a deck truly focused on non-creature spells, ensuring that we can play our sweepers to maximum effect because we're not playing creatures. Alright, let's break down this control deck. We have 11 counters. We've got Spell Pierce, Disdainful Stroke, Negate, Quench, Tail's End, Dovin's Veto, Mystical Dispute, Whirlwind Denial, Neutralize, Sinister Sabotage, and Absorb. We've got 4 sweepers in Deafening Clarion, Shatter the Sky, Cleansing Nova, and Settle the Wreckage. We've got 4 pieces of spot removal, Elspeth Conquers Death, Blink of an Eye, Lava Coil, and Inspired Ultimatum. We've got 2 pieces of acceleration, Arcane Signet, and I don't know how you say this card, Rogrin Crystal? And we have 3 total nonsense cards that are not at all reasonable in this format. Search for Azcanta, Mass Manipulation, and Karn's Temporal Sundering. Not reasonable. And speaking of not reasonable, we have 4 planeswalkers that do it all. They draw cards, they remove threats, and they threaten to win the game. Teferi Time Raveler, Ral Izzet Viceroy, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, and Chandra Awakened Inferno. You probably have lost to these cards, or won with these cards, a lot of times by now if you've been playing Magic. I mean, who needs dedicated win conditions anyway? Why win anytime soon when you can just activate, 1 turn at a time and win eventually, maybe? Alright, one actually interesting aspect of this deck is you get access to some of the new exciting tricolor cards from Ikoria. Inspired Ultimatum is great for a deck that can support it. Whirlwind of Thought is going to draw you a card for every spell in the deck. And I'm really excited to try out Mythos of Vadrock. While it doesn't look like that much on the surface, it does prevent Planeswalker activations for a turn, so you can imagine a scenario where your opponent has a Planeswalker and a creature, and you clear the creature out and deny the Planeswalker's activation for the turn. Then on the next turn, you might be able to deal with the Planeswalker. Is this deck better than just building an Azorius Teferi Hero of Dominaria deck? Well, I don't know, probably not. Just loading up on more counterspells is potentially better than anything else. But is this deck more interesting? Yes. Slightly. Can we move on to the next deck now? For the final deck I'm going to feature today, we're going from the last deck, which had no no creatures, to a deck that is only creatures. This last deck is Nethroi Apex of Death with Umori, the Collector, as its companion. So Nethroi is a 5-mana white, black, and green creature. It's a 5/5 Death Touch and lifelink, but as with these tricolor legendary creatures from Ikoria, you want to mutate it. Costs 7 to mutate. Whenever this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And Umori is a 4-mana 4/5, it's green, black, and when it enters the battlefield, choose a card type. We're going to be choosing creature every single time in this deck. It says, spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. Nethroi is definitely a sweet one. It's not difficult to imagine mutating with a fully stocked graveyard and getting all sorts of goodies back. For example, even just bringing back an Elvish Visionary to draw a card, a Knight of Autumn to destroy an artifact or enchantment, and a Ravenous Chupacabra to take down a creature is an incredible amount of value. That's only using 5 of the allotted 10 power from Nethroi's ability. Now, if I told you that we were building a deck with only creatures as spells, what would come to mind as its weak points? My first inclination is that it would be extremely susceptible to sweepers and lack interaction. We have a little bit of built-in protection just from sweepers, just from Nethroi's reanimation trigger, But with the move to the bigger historic card pool, we also get access to some much needed interaction, namely Kitesail Freebooter, Brain Maggot, and Ravenous Chupacabra. The former two can help preempt an opposing sweeper, and Ravenous Chupacabra gives us a nice efficient way of handling creatures, especially compared to our next best options, which are Cavalier of Night and like the sacrifice effect from Plaguecrafter. Another boon we get access to from the historic card pool are ways of replacing cards and stocking our graveyard. We get a couple of straight cantrips from Elvish Visionary and Dusk Legion Zealot, and we also get a couple Explore creatures like Merfolk Branchwalker and Jadelight Ranger. So they can either replace themselves or stock our graveyard, because if we don't draw the card from the Explorer, if it's not a land card, that means it's a creature card, and that means that serves a purpose when it goes to our graveyard. We have a couple cards that are intended on stocking our graveyard, Stitcher's Supplier, Skull Prophet, but for the most part, the cards are going to make it to the graveyard the conventional way, which is through the battlefield. So cards that allow us to wear down our opponent's resources are critical for this deck so that we have some interaction. So like Burglar Rat, Yerox, Fenlurker, and Priest of Forgotten Gods, and Plaguecrafter are all valuable ways of trading resources with the opponent. And as this is essentially a creature toolbox deck, I mean, we've got, one of every single card in our deck. We're fortunate enough to have two creatures to help us find our key pieces, like Chupacabra or Knight of Autumn. Fauna Shaman is a historic-only card that lets us trade any creature for another while stocking our graveyard. And Fiend Artisan is a standard available card, but it definitely benefits from having, say, Chupacabra or Brain Maggot in its toolbox. Well, there you have it. That's the Nethroi Reanimation deck. I'm not 100% sure how it's going to perform, as interaction is a nice thing to have plenty of in your deck if your deck isn't fast, and this deck is not fast. We will miss out on having some really nice cards on like Casualties of War, but hopefully the sweetness of getting to play a companion and a commander as awesome as Nethroi will make up for it. Thanks for watching this installment of the Brawl Project. This video was a huge project, but if Wizards of the Coast is going to keep on giving us Brawl events for free, I'll be motivated to keep making content. Historic Brawl is an absolute blast, and I'm really excited by the fact that we seem to get one of these events each month. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please do all the things like comment, subscribe, tell your friends, enemies, parents, whoever, and links to all the deck lists as well as other resources from the Brawl Project are in the description, so be sure to check that out. The best way to stay up to date with the Brawl Project is probably Twitter and Discord, as I post updates there all the time. Thanks again for watching, and have a great time brawling.